Tucked away on the outskirts of Bracknell in Berkshire, Mulgari might not be a name you're familiar with, although you may well have driven cars from big brands with some white label parts engineered by them. You might also have heard about the cars that they've put a name to, their Icon series. The first two Icon cars bookended the performance car spectrum, Icon 1 being a McLaren, Icon 2 being a Mini. Now there is this, the Icon 3. With a carbon roof, new suspension, new bodywork, an M performance diff, new seats, new steering wheel and more power and torque, it is a BMW M240i that has had quite the makeover. Today we are going to be amongst the very first to drive the Icon 3. Through towns and villages and along the M4 motorway, this wasn't a car that was trying to grab your attention by deafening you or shaking you to pieces. It felt well resolved and rather mature, rather like the looks.
I like the big box arches. Obviously it would be lovely if they could be whole new panels rather than extensions. I think there's quite a grown-up way they've gone about this car. I like the little yellow highlights, but they haven't gone overboard with things like that. In crayon, that Porsche colour, it's rather good for this. It stands out without being shouty. But what of all those goals to create a driver's car? Well, things you notice straight away, obviously this steering wheel and this seat, they make a big difference. Touch points like that. You sit really well hemmed in by the seat and that little bit lower as well, so you feel in the right position from the word go. The steering wheel too, beautifully trimmed in Alcantara, and obviously it's slightly thinner than the wheels that you're used to getting in M cars. The engine certainly has more than enough performance. They're claiming 440 brake horsepower and 442 pounds-foot of torque, which is 600 newton meters, although I'm reliably informed those are definitely conservative figures, and it feels it.
Compared to an M2 comp, it is up by 36 brake horsepower and 36 pounds-foot of torque. To be honest though, I'm not sure the Icon 3 actually needs its extra oomph. Traction is impressive, but the engine has a very boosted character that is quite entertaining but doesn't feel quite as sophisticated and well resolved as other parts of it. Yes, there is a claimed sub 4 second 0 to 60 mph time, but I think this is a car that is more subtle than pure number hunting. And while we're on the subject of the drivetrain, because this is based on an M240i, you could of course choose to have your Icon 3 with 3 pedals and an H-pattern manual, which would no doubt slow it down a little more still, but would also be rather fun.
It is a good sounding engine. You get all sorts of nice pops and crackles from that Akrapovic exhaust. What it does lack is that sort of, obviously, anything approaching the spine-tingling induction noise of a naturally aspirated engine. You can't get that. It feels like it really wants to sound like that, but it just isn't going to. The gearbox, perhaps that's the weakest point of the whole package, because that's what they've been left with from the 240i. I mean, a manual would obviously complete it absolutely perfectly. It's not as crisp as the DCT either. Having said that, the paddles are nice and it's not bad at all. It's just not quite as sharp as I suspect they would want in a car of this sort. Having said that, it's a lot more easy to live with than an M3 CSL's single clutch automated manual. The undoubted star of the show though is the suspension. This KW suspension is brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. The way they were talking about this car, I hoped it would be set up in a way that I would like, and instantly I love it. The way it flows down the road reminds me, as I said before, of that E46 CSL, which I know they were going for. There's a sort of slight looseness almost to the steering and the way the suspension is supple. You look at the body kit on this and it looks all muscular, muscle bound, I suppose, really four square with those big arches, and you think, oh, it's going to be tough and rigid almost, the suspension. Not a bit of it. It's the complete opposite. There's a delicacy, a liveliness to it. There are some really bumpy, nasty roads around here, and yet it copes superbly. Not once do you get the impression that that big front splitter is going to scuff, and it means as well, because the way the power and torque comes in, it's quite boosted. And you think if this was potentially in, well, certainly a standard 240i or even an M2, certainly with the early M2s, it would be not completely undrivable, but really not particularly pleasant trying to put it through the sort of the bouncy rear end that you're used to with those. This, however, because there's a pliancy in there, traction feels fantastic.
Here is Benjamin Sunners to explain the rationale behind it.
You could say it's my baby, I guess. I'm a huge M fan. I have to admit I'm not so much in the current guise of M cars, but there's just been so many great M cars. I mean, the E30 is probably the coolest thing you'll ever meet. Maybe not the best driving version, but you know it's great. Then the 46 M3 is whether it be in CSL guys or whatever, I think it's always going to be a bit of a classic. Coming into things like M as well were great cars, kind of unique cars as well, because they never really did much from the M. So for me, there's so many of these great cars, but some of the new ones don't capture any of that. And I understand why it is. You know, like the M2 is compromised in where it sits in the product line, so you can't probably make an M2 as good as you would want to, because obviously it would upset an M6 owner who spent 100 grand versus 50. So for us it was kind of, or for me it was kind of looking at what did I want what was my dream M car. 1M was there. Didn't fall in love with the engine. If I had a V8, we probably would have never been doing Icon 3, I would have just been in love. E46 CSL, stunning car. Lacked the comfort maybe of when you're not on circuit. And the 92, the V8 and all the modernness around it was brilliant, just a bit heavy. So the Icon 3 is really, I guess, our take on all things that were M cars. So trying to make the 2 Series as good as it could be, with that 1M edge, E30-esque in there, with some of the more modern features you would come to expect from an M car. Carbon roof being probably the biggest one, as it's kind of the quintessential now. If you haven't got carbon roof, it's not a proper M car. So that, you know, it's very much I guess you could call it a homage. That's really what it is.
And explain why, obviously, some people would think the easy thing to do would just be to take an M2 and try and mould that to what you want, but you haven't done that.
That's because that would have been the easy thing to do. And would it have been different? I mean, we could have engineered an M2. We have engineered M2s for the Nürburgring. We could have done it. Good question. I think just for me, it wouldn't have been special enough for me. It would have been a really beautiful M2, don't get me wrong, and the Nürburgring cars, some of them are beautiful. It just probably wouldn't have kind of captured everything I want for me personally, or I hope that users of Icon 3 would want as well.
Yeah, and you like the B58 engine?
Yeah. I mean, I think the B58 is actually my favourite current modern M engine. I think, you know, it sounds great. The S55, yeah, more torque, more power, and create a little bit robotic for me. And I think it's really important, especially for me when I look at projects and what we're doing, is that people connect to cars quite emotionally, and some of the real basic human features is sound and sight and touch, and that's something that you have to connect. And I think sound for me is probably one of the most important ones. If you don't get that sound right, people don't kind of fall in love with them. Hence why CSL, let's face it, the noise is what everybody gets in love with.
Absolutely.
And you could argue the reason people haven't fallen in love with McLarens is because they kind of lack that sort of tonal Ferrari chorus type noise about them. So, you know, and for me the B58 has got that more than any other. Plus it's a great package. The M240i out of the box, to be honest, is brilliant. Yeah. So I like it. So it made sense. Not the financial way to go in terms of how much development we put into it, but for me it's kind of an all-round car, really.
Absolutely. And just take us through a few because of the changes you've made, because you've got people like KW, Carfection,
yeah,
but also M Performance parts in there as well.
Yeah. So, you know, sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So there's some great suppliers out there who we've worked with on our tuning side of the business, and also that are credible names and know what they're doing. So, for example, KW, they've done motorsport stuff with BMW for a long time. So to partner with Richard and KW to develop the suspension system seemed like a no-brainer. At the end of the day, it's a better product. I mean, we could spend years developing suspension and be behind where they are. A Carfection, well, it's without doubt the best. There was no compromise, so that answers that question. And then, yeah, you know, I never want to detract from the fact that BMW make great cars. So they make great cars and there's some great parts available. So again, why, you know, we're not trying to poo-poo BMW and we're not trying to say that they're not great cars. So
They do the diff.
yeah, you know, they do the in-performance diff, and you know, so why would we not?
I love the vision and passion that has gone into creating the Icon 3. Just listening to Ben talk about the car and understanding the inspiration behind it makes the end result more appealing. It's good that people do things like this. The price is undeniably a sticking point, because £79,000 is a lot, although you can see where the work has gone in and there aren't any economies of scale. And there are definitely elements that I would love to have fitted to any 2 Series, be it an M240i or an M2 Comp. 3 S's stand out for me: seats, steering wheel and suspension. The touch points improve the car from the moment you get in, but the KW suspension setup is the highlight. But you'd probably gathered that.
Through a sort of medium speed corner like this, right? Turn in, feel it lean into the suspension. You can just play with it all the way through there. It's so good. It really, really is so good.